The fence post split clean in two, the crack echoing through the valley like a gunshot. Elias Rourke dropped his hammer, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on his face. The sun was a red wound sliding behind the mesas, the air so dry it could flake a man's thoughts into powder. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate steps in the sand. Not the shuffle of cattle, not the clatter of boots. Bare feet. Elias turned, his hand resting on the handle of the shovel like it might be a rifle. She stood at the far end of the corral, small, thin, dark hair tangled and full of burrs. Her skin was the same color as the land, her dress torn at the hem. Eyes black as wet stone watched him, unblinking. He said nothing. Neither did she. The only sound was the slow swing of the gate creaking in the wind. Finally, she spoke. Her voice cracked like it hadn't been used in days. "I can't live without a man." Elias's brow furrowed. He spat to the side, buying a moment. "You lost, girl." She didn't answer, only stepped closer, her eyes flicking to the barn, the bucket, the horse tethered by the fence. She was exhausted, but her back stayed straight. A flicker of pride lived behind the hunger in her face. "You got a name?" he asked. Her lips trembled before she whispered, "Naya." "Where's your people?" She looked toward the dying light, the horizon bleeding red. "Gone." The air between them felt stretched thin, tight enough to snap. Elias exhaled through his nose, long and slow. He could have told her to keep walking, should have. The land didn't take kindly to strays, not in Apache country. But something in her voice, the same kind of hollow that had lived in his own since the grave took his wife. "Barn's open," he muttered, nodding toward it. "Hay's clean enough. Water by the trough. Don't steal from me, and you can stay the night." She didn't thank him, just gave a single nod, solemn as a prayer, and moved past him, light as smoke. The smell of dust and dry grass followed her. Elias watched until the shadows swallowed her whole. When the crickets came alive, he lit his lantern and walked the fence line. By the creek bed, he noticed hoofprints, not his, not hers. Fresh, deep, a horse carrying weight and speed. He crouched, ran his hand along the print, and looked up toward the dark ridges. The wind shifted, carrying something faint, the echo of laughter, maybe, or the sound of man's cough riding the distance. Elias straightened, the lantern's flame trembling in the breeze. He looked back toward the barn where the girl now slept, then toward the canyon where the prints led. And for the first time in years, he felt it again, that quiet stirring in his chest that always came before trouble. The knock came hard and mean, the kind that didn't ask for permission. Elias froze with his coffee halfway to his lips. Naya's head snapped up from where she was mending a bridle strap. The morning light poured through the window, slicing across her face like a blade. 3 more knocks. Heavy. Final. Elias set his cup down, the clink louder than it should have been. He reached under the table, drew the Colt from its holster, and eased the door. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Outside, 4 riders waited. Their coats carried the red dust of the canyon, their eyes the cold shine of men who'd seen too much and liked it. The leader, tall, clean-shaven, with a scar cutting through his cheek, grinned when Elias stepped out. "Fine morning," the man said. His voice carried the drawl of whiskey and arrogance. "We're looking for someone. Young Apache girl. Ran off 2 nights back. You seen her?" Elias rested one hand on the post. "Ain't seen anyone but jackrabbits and ghosts." The man's grin widened. "That's so? Name's Kane Duval. My boys and I keep order out here. Lot of trouble with thieves lately. Not my concern." Duval leaned closer, the sun glinting off the revolver at his hip. "If you do see her, best tell us. She's got something that belongs to me." Elias said nothing. Duval's eyes narrowed. "You can't lie forever, old man." He spat in the dirt, the sound sharp. "She'll bring death on your doorstep." The riders wheeled their horses and left a storm of dust behind them. Elias watched until they were nothing but heat shimmer. When he turned, Naya stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes burning with something deeper than fear. "They'll come back," she whispered. Elias holstered the gun. "You want to tell me why?" Her hands shook as she reached into her satchel, pulling out a small leather book, cracked and blood-stained. "This," she said, They sell women, children, names, prices, places. I took it. Elias stared at it, at the horror pressed between its pages, and then at her. You could have kept running, he said. I did. Her voice trembled, till my legs broke. The old rancher turned toward the horizon. Duval's tracks were still fresh in the sand, curving back toward the ridge. He could almost feel the weight of what she'd brought into his life, and what it would cost to keep her alive. Get inside, he said finally. She hesitated. You'll send me away tomorrow? Elias shook his head. Tomorrow's too late. He walked to the porch, crouched beside a loose floorboard, and pried it open. The sun caught the gleam of metal, a revolver, worn and clean, resting like a memory. He picked it up, thumbed the hammer, and muttered under his breath. Guess I ain't retired after all. The wind screamed across the desert, carrying grit that stung the eyes and bit the skin. The storm was coming. Elias could smell it, that dry, electric taste of sand and thunder. He moved along the porch, loading shells one by one, the click of brass against iron steady as a heartbeat. Naya crouched near the corral, burying something beneath the sand, the ledger wrapped in oiled cloth. Her hair whipped like black fire in the wind. You sure they'll come? She shouted over the rising howl. Elias didn't look up. Men like Duval always come. A distant rumble, not thunder. Hooves. 4 riders, silhouettes against the burning sky, riding hard through the canyon. Elias's jaw tightened. Inside, Naya shook her head. No, I fight. He almost told her no, but then saw the way her fingers moved, smooth, certain, checking the rifle, steadying her breath. There was no fear in her anymore, only something sharp and cold. The riders split as they reached the ranch, 2 circling wide toward the barn, 2 charging straight for the porch. The first shot came from Naya, clean, perfect. One rider pitched sideways off his saddle, his body tumbling through dust. Elias fired next, catching the second in the chest before he hit the ground. The storm broke then, lightning without rain, the wind turning the world into red haze. The last 2 men dismounted, shouting through the chaos. A flash of metal, the bark of a rifle. Bullets tore splinters from the porch post beside Elias's head. He dropped to one knee, reloaded, fired twice. The shapes vanished behind the corral fence. Then came the smell of smoke. Elias turned. The barn was burning. Flames clawed at the roof, orange and wild. Through the roar came a voice, deep and furious. Roar! Cain Duval stepped out of the fire's glare, his coat torn, his revolver gleaming. He had Naya by the arm. Should have left her where she belonged, he shouted, dragging her closer to the flames. Elias moved into the open, gun raised. Let her go. Duval laughed, a sound without soul. You think you're savant her? She's the reason you'll die tonight. Naya twisted free, slamming her elbow into his ribs. His shot went wild. Elias didn't wait. He squeezed the trigger once clean. The bullet struck Duval's center chest. The man staggered, mouth open in shock, and fell backward into the fire. The barn groaned, collapsing in a storm of sparks. Naya stumbled clear, clutching the ledger close as the heat washed over them. Elias caught her by the shoulder, pulling her away from the blaze. They stood together in the storm's fading roar, smoke curling, blood dripping into dust, the desert wind keening like a hymn. Is it over? She asked. Elias stared at the burning barn, the last of the fire reflecting in his eyes. For now, he said, but not forever. The shovel struck rock with a dull ring. Elias leaned on the handle, breath ragged, the morning sun just starting to burn the chill from the ground. The grave stood in a neat row behind the corral, 4 mounds of raw earth, marked only by wooden stakes. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling from the ruins of the barn. Naya knelt beside him, hands folded tight. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes hollow but unbroken. A hawk circled above, its cry slicing through the stillness. Elias straightened, wiped his brow with a sleeve. That's the last of him. She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed on the horizon, endless sand, endless silence. A horse whinnied from the stable. Elias turned and saw the rider before the sound reached him. A lone figure on a bay mare, badge glinting in the morning light. The U.S. Marshal dismounted, dusted off his coat, and took in the scene with sharp, weary eyes. Elias Rourke? Elias nodded. Got word there was trouble up this way. Heard Duval's name mentioned. Elias reached into his coat, pulled out the scorched ledger wrapped in cloth, and handed it over. Proof enough to bury that whole outfit, he said. The marshal flipped through the charred pages, his expression hardening. Where'd you get this? Elias didn't answer. He looked toward Naya, but she was gone. Only her tracks remained, small, deliberate, heading toward the canyon. The marshal squinted after them. She part of this? Elias's jaw worked, but no words came. He simply said, she's part of what's left. The marshal tucked the ledger into his saddlebag. You did right, Rourke. Justice will take it from here. He mounted, tipped his hat, and rode off into the heat. Elias stood watching until both rider and dust vanished. Then he turned toward the canyon, the same direction Naya had taken. The light shifted across the land, painting everything gold. By noon, word began to spread. Travelers passing through Bisbee spoke of a lone rider, a girl with a red scarf and a rifle longer than her arm. She rode like smoke, they said, and when men tried to follow, the wind itself turned against them. They said she freed captives from slavers down near the border. They said she left no bodies, only shadows. Some swore she wasn't real at all, just a spirit, riding the dust for the lost. And somewhere, around some old fire, an aging rancher sat in silence while others told her story. When I asked if he'd ever seen her, he'd only smile faintly and stare into the flames. Some folks need saving, he'd say. Some folks learn to save themselves. The fire would crackle, the night would lean closer, and his voice would fall to a whisper. She didn't need a man after all.